Okay, Kiana,
Yes.
how would you describe legislative session?
Just imagine like 15 squirrels fighting over 3 acorns. And I want to say it's honestly due to our $1.2 billion deficit that we have here in Colorado. So, again, it's been a wild ride.
When you talk about the budget cuts and stuff, so in the legislative process, I know there's like fiscal notes and things. So what were the bills that were impossible to pass?
That's a good question, honestly. It's actually quite a lot. So in actuality, by the time the legislative session ended, there were like 120 bills still in the legislative process. And unprecedented times comes unprecedented legislative processes. So a lot of legislation got held up there, and actually during that legislative process where bills went to appropriations, bills will actually die. And so there was a lot of that this year because our state is so broke. We cannot afford bills and good legislation actually. And so we are proud of our wins, and if you go to our website, you will know what those bills are. We're so excited that these pass. However, there are a lot of bills that died honestly on the calendar because our state cannot afford them.
Speaking of the bills that died, our love of the session, can you tell us what happened with taxes? And we're trying to fix the budget, but we can't, because why? Tell us why.
Yes. If you've been following along, you know that New Era Colorado came out and supported House Joint Resolution 1023, which was sponsored by Representative Camacho and Representative Garcia. And we really supported this because we wanted the courts to weigh in on Tabor's constitutionality. We wanted to have this conversation of the fact of our tax system is not great right now. This is why we are in this deficit, and we can't pass legislation, right? This is why we we are working on this tax work. The story of this piece of legislation, we actually wanted to spark debate on the House floor to have legislators come in and give an updated opinions on the Taxpayer Bill of Rights and our tax system. However, this was not scheduled for the House floor, and honestly, that's all we really wanted is for people to start having this conversation because it's desperately needed now more than ever. We heard from folks who are in charge of scheduling things like the House floor that they didn't want to take up time on the legislative calendar to discuss this. I feel quite disappointed that we weren't able to at least have legislators talk about this. We were trying to just strike up the conversation about can we possibly do something to not fight over 3 acorns. The conversation, and I think that we have all these bills dying on the calendar, and even really, really good bills just barely making it past the legislative process. I think that's quite a disappointment, and I think there's nothing wrong with the conversation and starting that up. However, I do feel still invigorated to do this work, knowing that all of these issues that we all care about really banks on this. So I am excited to work with so many people out there that want to do this work and understand the fact that we all have to come together and create bold policy change in order to see a brighter future in Colorado, one that we all want.
Can you give us any insight into why the legislators didn't want to talk about this measure?
Yeah, I think, this piece of legislation really was the boogeyman this legislative session. And I really do think it was because, for one, Tabor is very taboo to talk about nowadays. So if you didn't know that, you know that now. It scares a lot of people. And I think it's because it's like they don't know exactly what their constituents are feeling about Tabor. And so I think there's a lot of like scared behavior going on. They're scared to talk about the subject. They're scared to like take a position or a stance on this particular issue. And so I think that's, in my personal opinion, that's where folks are like coming from. I think people are scared about like their political campaigns and whether or not, if they do take a stance on this, this may somehow impact their political campaign or something like that. I think though what young people want is bold decision makers, and taxing the wealthy shouldn't be a bold decision, but that's something that young people want. So I think they're looking for authentic legislators and decision makers.
And how do we move those decision makers to be able to talk about it?
Contact your legislator. That's really, really important because that gives them the backing that they need to make policy decisions. They don't want to move unless they're for certain their constituency wants this. Contacting your legislators, emailing them, call their offices. It's really important. Show up to their town halls. It's really important that you are saying, I don't support oligarchs in office. I don't support federal budget cuts. I want to make sure Colorado is protected against oligarchs and we are safe against like federal budget cuts. That stuff is really, really, really important to them when you get involved. And now the legislative session is over, but it's not our last legislative session. Next legislative session, you can also feel free to testify continuously from now until next legislative session. Though, reach out to your legislators, email them, call them. Let them know, show up to their town halls, let them know this is something you care about. That will most definitely let them know that they have the backing that they need to take a stance on this. This is the work we're going to continue to do outside of this legislative session. So stay tuned in how you can get involved into our tax campaign work, knowing that Colorado cannot continue to live like this. Young people not only want wealthy people to pay what they owe in taxes, but also they want things like higher education, healthcare, our roads, housing, well funded so they can see a brighter future for Colorado. So that's what's happened with our tax work thus far, but just stay tuned.
So also, you said we'll have more legislative sessions to talk about this, and there could be one coming sooner rather than later. That might be a little bit out of the norm. And can you talk a bit about like why that'll happen, and what we know is coming down the line from the federal government?
Yeah, that's a good way to phrase that question, honestly. So during this past legislative session, what happens every normal legislative session, Colorado passes their own budget for the year, the fiscal year. However, we know federal budget cuts are coming, which means that Colorado probably has to backfill whatever funding they will lose from the federal government. In that case, since we already passed our budget for this fiscal year, we have to go back and kind of reallocate some things, shift some things around. And since that is done through legislation, we will probably have a next legislative session, and we will call that a special session. So in particular, people are hearing that, of course, Medicaid is getting cut, and if you're paying attention, you'll know from the federal government they're planning on cutting Medicaid. So when we're talking about Colorado's budget, we're considering Medicaid too as well, and what Colorado is funding for people who are using Medicaid within the state. Since, again, we are expecting those cuts from the federal government, it is likely the case we will have a special session in the fall to reallocate and shift around our budget.
Will we still be broke?
We will still be broke. We will still be broke.
Where are they going to find that money?
If they tax the wealthy.
Good point.
If they tax the wealthy, and get rid of the flat income tax rate and not have everyday people burdening the taxes, carrying our state on our shoulders, and make wealthy people pay what they owe, then that's where they will find the money. So just remember that the president of Anschutz and you are paying the same income taxes in this state. So if you want like a better Colorado, if you want better policies passed, then encourage your legislators and let them know that like there is a place where this money can come from, and it's from the president Anschutz of Colorado.
Is there anything else you'd like to add? And what were some of the laughters during session? Did anything make you giggle a little bit or make you go crazy like the squirrels?
I feel like quite honestly, I felt when it came to data privacy, I was wearing a tinfoil hat most of the time. It was very hard to have this conversation that when you give social media companies the legal power to collect certain types of data, to legally enforce illegal activity, that gives social media companies power of the state almost, of implementing laws. And so having that conversation made me feel so crazy. And that's why I encourage you to have these conversations, to have this conversation with us, because we understand social media, we understand TikTok, we understand Snapchat. However, we also do understand like social media does have some harms. However, I think that towing that line and having further conversation with you all is probably best, and making sure that you guys have a seat at the table when it comes to your accounts and your accounts on social media platforms. So, yeah.
God, that was beautiful.